All right, guys, this is going to be the Linkage Institution's presentation. It should not be as long as the previous one if you watched that one. Okay, so linkage institutions, let's define that really quickly. So remember, a linkage institution is any organization that links citizens to their government. And it allows the government to understand what the citizens want and also the citizens to understand what the government is doing. So this is things like interest groups, the media, political parties are the major ones. Perhaps not surprisingly, linkage institutions are not strong in Russia, and there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, political parties are very limited in terms of their power, and there are really limited choices for people. Historically, they have been unstable. After the revolution, in the attempted coup in 1991, when the USSR fell apart and we ended up with the Russian Federation under Boris Yeltsin. At that time, the parties were pretty quickly thrown together. Most of them formed around a leader rather than an ideology. That usually continues today. It's United Russia is really Putin's party. It's not so much based on ideology as it is around Putin. In 1995, there were 43 parties on the ballot. By 1999, that had gone down to 26. People have a hard time with this many choices developing any sort of party loyalties. In 2007, initially that's when the electoral system for the Duma became a proportional system, and Russia raised their threshold to 7%, meaning any political party that got seats in the Duma had to have at least 7% of the votes. So that also cut down on the number of parties in existence because you had to win a higher number of votes to get any representation. Today, there are really no strong opposing political parties to United Russia, which is the dominating party. In 2007, only 4 parties gained seats. So we went from 43 on the ballot in 1995 down to 4 parties in 2007. And I'm going to link for you guys the 2016 Duma elections so that you can look through the party results there. Okay. So the other issue with interest groups, so the way interest groups work in the United States is that, a group forms independently on their own. They have something that they want to push for, like the NRA or the AARP or the National Council for the Social Studies, any group that wants to form that has any sort of interest, and then they go meet with lawmakers and they tell lawmakers what they think should be done. Well, that doesn't exist in Russia. They have something called state corporatism, where the state determines which groups have access to lawmakers and which groups get to have any sort of say in policymaking. So there's no free interest group system, where in the United States anybody can go and lobby and we have access. Access is one of those key features of a democracy. That doesn't exist. The state decides which groups get to have any sort of say and the others do not. So this means civil society is very weak, and interest groups really have no solid footing. They can form, in terms of actually having any influence, it's very limited. The media is mostly state-controlled. I think we saw in that movie we watched, there was an independent media outlet, and it eventually was shut down. So the state does monitor and control what is put out there. It's a very dangerous place to be a journalist, especially if you're going to criticize the government. In terms of press freedom, it ranks 140th out of 178 countries that are ranked, so very low in terms of press freedom. So the government does intervene. I think we saw in the video too, the government intervenes in some manner if the government is criticized. We saw some instances of very suspicious deaths that have taken place, and the government doesn't claim those, and they can not always trace back to Putin or anything, but people who are outspoken can sometimes wind up suspiciously killed. Since 1992, 52 journalists have been murdered, and so this is the 3rd most dangerous country in the entire world for journalists. Okay, so back to parties. Let's kind of go a little bit more in depth with this. So Russia has a dominant party system, meaning one large party directs the system. Small parties do exist. They may compete. Again, this increases the legitimacy of Putin's government. When you give the illusion that there are competitive choices, it increases the likelihood that Putin will retain more support for what he's doing. We can say, oh, look, we had this election and you had choices and I still won, even though in reality those other options don't really have a chance to take the presidency. United Russia is the big party. It was founded in April 2001. The ideology is really hard to pin down. It's a pro-Putin party. This is from last year. You're not reading an article about this. So it's really it's kind of a centralized ideology that follows what Putin wants to do. So how do they dominate? Obviously, just Putin and his influence. United Russia is a strong political machine. They give incentives to people who follow them. So I talked in the previous slideshow about how bribery for common tasks is common. Corruption is pervasive. So people who follow the party line, who recruit others to follow the party line, are usually rewarded with jobs in the party itself. Remember that the president chooses all the governors of the 85 regions, and the president, remember, has also created those 7 super districts and put somebody in charge. So all those people use their influence. Those are all pro-Putin people. He picked all those people so they can then use their influence in local government to increase support for the party. And now the election and political party requirements also limit opposition. So in order for parties to get on the ballot, they have to have affiliates, so they have to have members in more than half of the regions, and that's of those 85 regions, with a certain number of registered members in each region. This is really difficult because Russia's regions vary drastically in terms of religion and ethnic makeup, so that's a restriction right there that keeps parties off the ballot. You have to be a legally registered party, so it's hard, grassroots efforts take time. And then that 7% threshold for the half of the members who are still chosen through the mixed proportional system still exists. And so that's pretty tough to get elected when the threshold is that high. Okay, so some other parties that exist. One of them is the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. It still exists. This is sort of the remnants from the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This party serves as the strongest opposition to United Russia. It's less reformist than other parties and emphasizes central planning and nationalism. Many older Russians who perhaps, miss some of the, stability or some of the, maybe what they saw as more economic progress during the later years of communism, focus on this party and are willing to vote for it. Another one is called A Just Russia. And this is a 2006 party that formed from 2 other parties, the Motherland People's Patriotic Union, the Party of Pensioners, and the Party of Life, so 3 parties. It was led at that time by the Speaker of the Federation Council. It sits a little bit to the left of United Russia if we're trying to determine where these parties sit ideologically. And it's really just an opposition in name. They don't really form any sort of competitive real contest to the party. For instance, this party did support Putin and Medvedev both and say that they are the party of the working man. The other one I would like to bring up is the Liberal Democratic Party, which is totally misnamed. Okay, so this party is really an extreme nationalist party, a very strongly anti-Western party. This party has come out with nuclear threats against Japan. They're very anti-Semitic. They're sexist. They get a lot of support from working class men, from the military, but they're the extremes. So that is another one that you may see on the ballot if you were voting in Russia. The last thing I want to talk about with linkage institutions, the oligarchs are really significant in Russia. Oligarchs, I mentioned, they kind of came out of, they started to gain influence in Russia during Boris Yeltsin's presidency when he instituted shock therapy, and a small number of people were able to get rich in the new capitalist system. So this is a group of very wealthy elite people. After Russia privatized industry, they controlled most of those industries. and at one point they controlled over half of Russian gross national product. So today, oligarchs still control the oil industry, they control the media. So it's significant in terms of political influence that a very small group of very wealthy people control some of the most important industries. So what this means for the rest of Russia is that other people are not able to access these industries, or maybe the oligarchs have more access to government and policy and how those are shaped than the ordinary citizen. So they did initially back Yeltsin. They got very rich under Yeltsin. Putin does resist their control. He does see them as competition. So he has tried to crack down on some of their influence. Some of them have been jailed under Putin's leadership. So some of those are power moves to kind of show that, Putin is still in charge. The mafia also exists. There is a world of underworld crime, and there's a black market in Russia. The mafia also gained a foothold after 1991. So these are challenges to linkage institutions when you're talking about people trying to really influence government through political parties, interest groups, media. The oligarchs and the mafia represent two pretty significant challenges to people being able to do that. All right, and we will wrap it up there.